Star Wars is famous for its villains, and there's many a good villain scene to choose from. The iconic introduction of Darth Vader, the Emperor's throne room, the Duel of the Fates, and of course, the cinematic masterpiece.
It's treason, then.
But there's one thing all these classic villains share: the Force. They're all magic evil space wizards, and that's all well and good, but when everyone's a magic evil space wizard, what do we do about all these other guys? Because let's face it, stormtroopers, they've never been the scariest bunch. This is a problem that Star Wars Rebels has to deal with, because across the first 2 seasons of Rebels, even when the Imperials win, they usually do so by the fault of the heroes. Imperials are dumb. So dumb. Look at all these big idiots flailing about. How are we going to make these guys a genuine, believable threat? We tried a couple evil space wizards. They were okay, but how do we make the average non-magic space wizard a threat to our heroes? Oh. What if we just have them fight Sherlock Holmes? Wait, what? Star Wars Rebels is a show of highs and lows, no doubt, but its highs are high, and it's no coincidence that most of those highs involve Grand Admiral Thrawn, without a doubt the scariest villain in all of Star Wars canon. And I do mean scary, because Thrawn is the first villain in Rebels, maybe even the first villain in all of Star Wars, who feels like he could actually win, and it all starts right here in this scene. But before we get into that, who is this strange blue man? Well, even if you've never watched Rebels, there's a higher than average chance that you've at least heard the name Thrawn. He's kind of a big deal. Back in the pre-Disney era of Star Wars, Thrawn was probably the most iconic non-movie villain in the Star Wars universe. Introduced in the novels as a villain who comes in and unifies the crumbling empire after the death of old Palpy. Now, confession time, I've never read these books. I knew Thrawn only by reputation, but oh boy, did he have a reputation. People who have read these books love Thrawn. When Disney purged most of the extended universe, Thrawn was one of the biggest losses that people pointed to. He left an impression, and I can't tell you why because I've never read them. Look at this cover art though. It's pretty cool. As you can see, he's blue and he has red eyes. Very menacing. When it was announced that Thrawn would be appearing in Rebels, that invited a lot of expectations to live up to, and that's only one part of the puzzle that this scene is trying to solve. The other part is introducing the show's new main bad guy. Season 1 and 2 had Agent Callus, a fairly small fish and also kind of bad at his job. He's trying his best though, bless him. And it also had the Inquisitors, who were certainly pretty intimidating, and they had helicopter lightsabers, which is, I mean, what can you say about that? They had helicopter lightsabers, but they were only really a threat to Ezra and Kanan, our resident Jedi. But then, Season 2 ended on an extreme high from a villain standpoint. Darth Vader showed up and maybe just killed Ahsoka, and also Maul made his first appearance in the show. The pressure was on. Incredibly high expectations to meet, incredibly tough act to follow. How were they going to top it? The previous episode gave us the answer, but this scene cemented it. Thrawn. Hera and Ezra are on a mission to Hera's family home, which is being used as the Imperial's base to steal back a priceless family heirloom. It's going fairly standard. Ezra's in disguise, and they're relying on that good old-fashioned Imperial stupidity that the guards will assume Hera is just a lowly servant. They make it to the office, they get the thingy, they're planning to walk out the front door when suddenly... This is the true introduction of Thrawn into this show. Everything before this is just set up for this moment. Hera goes to open the door, and he's already there waiting. This sequence is a masterpiece in rising tension. As a viewer, you learn along with our heroes just how dangerous this new guy is. It starts off slow, and in any other episode this ruse would work. Captain Slavin here is our stand-in for the average Imperial officer, immediately dismissing her as a servant and sending her off to work in the kitchens, damn it. But Thrawn has already twigged. She's caught in the web. The scene moves to the office, isolated. Slavin is very confused. He thinks Thrawn has gone mad interrogating a lowly servant. She's nothing but a petty thief.
To defeat an enemy, you must know them. Not simply their battle tactics, but their history, philosophy, art. So I will ask you again, Captain. Do you know what this is.
The question is in itself the clue. Thrawn already knows who she is, but he takes his time, slowly, methodically breaking down the clues with an ice-cold demeanour. He's toying with her. He wants her to know that she's already lost.
Some primitive native trinket.
It's a Kalikori, a revered Twi'lek heirloom, passed from parent to child through generations, worthless to outsiders, priceless to family.
He teases her, talks about her history of war, of fighting. When she finally breaks character to taunt him, he doesn't react in the slightest, and when Ezra heroically begins his escape attempt, Thrawn stuns him before he even has a chance to raise his weapon. He saw it coming a mile away.
You dare!
Slavin, please, you embarrass me in front of our host.
Host? What?
May I introduce Hera Syndulla, rebel pilot, freedom fighter and military leader, daughter of your nemesis, Cham Syndulla.
How did you know?
Because rebels have friends always rushing to the rescue.
I do not say this lightly, and I do not say it about many things, but this scene is flawless. It works on so many levels. It works as a reintroduction to Thrawn. It works as an introduction to a cool new villain. It works as a raising of stakes for the rest of the show. It's perfect. We've seen the rebels get away with tricks like this all the time. Imperials are dumb. But Thrawn dismantles the ruse in seconds. He'd dismantled it before the scene even began. He was waiting in the exact place they try to escape. Slavin here is our standard cartoon kids villain. He's mean, he shouts a lot, he acts superior to the rebels because he's ultimately a pretty weak-willed and cruel man in a position of power. Thrawn is something more. He treats every adversary with respect because he doesn't need to act like he's superior. He is superior. A genius character is very hard to write well. Either they're not convincingly as smart as they're supposed to be, or they're so galaxy brain intelligent that they lose the audience's believability along the way. Thrawn's intelligence comes across so naturally because you can perfectly follow his logic. You can understand exactly how he came to figure everything out.
I have increased security per your orders, Grand Admiral, but I don't understand why. The rebel activity is far from here.
It's closer than you think, Captain.
Elevator shutting. The guards on patrol don't use the elevator. A servant? No, the captain has limited them to the kitchens. An intruder then? Interesting. An intruder who hasn't raised any alarm or suspicion. In disguise, no doubt. The elevator went down, so most likely on their way out, not in. Which leaves the front door as their most viable exit. Ah, a Kalikori. Interesting. A family heirloom in Twi'lek culture. No, Twi'lek would steal it for money. Green-skinned, green-eyed, like the girl in the painting. This is Hera Syndulla. Now, obviously, it requires the foreknowledge of what a Kalikori is, but that's what makes him so great as a villain. He did his homework. Thrawn isn't an evil space wizard. He can't shoot lightning out of his hands or choke people across the room or read people's minds. His superpower is that he's a big history nerd, and it's absolutely terrifying in a way no other villain in Star Wars is. Sure, his design is intimidating, and his exquisite voice work by Lars Mikkelsen gives him a real sense of menace, but he's terrifying because you can see exactly how he figured everything out. When you roll your eyes at the screen and think, oh, obviously the villain should do this, Thrawn does those things. He takes the Star Wars villain cliche book and throws it away, and suddenly the rebels are a serious threat of losing in a way they never have been before. Every plan they make, he's figured it out. Their spy, he already knows who it is. Their secret base on a planet that doesn't officially exist, child's play. I joked up top that he's evil Sherlock Holmes, but really that's who he is. This is the classic Sherlock moment, where Holmes reveals all the things he can tell about the person based on the clues. But when the same thing is done by a villain, it suddenly becomes extremely menacing. This scene, like many great Star Wars scene, is accompanied by an amazing score. It's a piece called Thrawn's Web, and it's easily the most memorable track to come out of Rebels. It starts slow, calm, whimsical, you could almost say. Then the organ comes in, not a sound you'd associate with Star Wars, symbolising that Thrawn is something new. The pace is slow and methodical like Thrawn's explanation, but the music grows louder and more intense with the scene's rising tension. It's perfect. It's valuable to note too that this scene involves Hera, undoubtedly the smartest member of our rebel squad, the go-to tactician of the team, and here she is being thoroughly outclassed. If this was Zeb or Ezra or even Sabine, sure, but no, he's outsmarting Hera like it ain't no thing at all. How do you beat a villain who's tougher than you? That's easy. You outsmart them. That's our plucky rebel's whole deal, outsmarting the Empire. But then, how do you beat a villain who's smarter than you? Space whales! The answer is space whales. You know, it's like rock, paper, scissors, except it's brains, bronze, space whales. That's the problem with the villain that you can't feasibly beat. You gotta come up with some nonsense. But that's a discussion for another day, maybe, probably, probably not. This is my first time doing this one something scene thingy, but it's a bit of fun in it. If I'm understanding how this works correctly, there's a playlist linked below with a bunch of other people who've made video essays about villainy things. I've already watched a few, and they're pretty cool. You should go check them out. Over somewhere. It's down, up, maybe. It's gonna fade in any second now, I'm sure. It's like I'm using the resource that the world has too much of. Girls. And
didn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, and I never got the impression before that this guy was like a sexist. Because, okay, This is part of the movie being made in 2021 that I think has some interesting